in the last 2 days, I've come across a good few cases of yellow rust and winter wheat. So again, that's something a grower maybe in Cork mightn't be expecting. You'd be kind of targeting and watching Septoria obviously has been the main challenge, but had a few cases locally here of yellow rust in recent days, and yellow rust can get away on you very, very quickly. So if you have yellow rust, there's no hanging about. You just have to get in and deal with it straight away.
All crops have grown strongly in the past week. The settled conditions allow for a more precise timing of inputs, which can be critical to getting the best results. Have you walked through crops in the past few days to assess the growth stage and decide what actions are needed during the good spell? You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We'd really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. Most winter and spring crops will need some level of input over the next week to 10 days. I'm delighted today to be joined by Shay Phelan and Ciaran Collins, both tillage specialists with Teagasc, to talk through the key actions farmers should consider right now. Later in the episode, I'm also joined by Andy Mahon, a farm manager on a large farm in the heart of the UK arable area, to hear how his crops are performing on farm and how recent UK government decisions are affecting his operations. But first, I caught up with Shay and Ciaran, and I began by asking Shay about his assessment of how crops are looking at the moment.
I think, Michael, the rain last week and the last couple of weeks, I suppose, has improved crops an awful lot. Up until the middle of April, we were probably looking for rain because we had very little rain in March and April. But since we've got the rain, the crops have bloomed, if you like, and are growing on very well. They're growing through the growth stages very, very quickly, and they've probably caught up to where they should be at this time of year. So for the most part, I'd say people are very happy with the way winter crops are at the moment.
Okay, and just focusing on the winter crops, Shay, just in terms of the, I suppose, urgent tasks that farmers need to tackle over the next 7 or 10 days, what are those?
If we start with winter wheat first, Michael, the Leaf 3 application, or the T1 as a lot of people tend to call it still, that is, if it hasn't been applied to some of those early sown winter crops, most of the conventional or not, most of the normal sown crops are now getting that Leaf 3 application, and it's probably something like Folpit and a bit of a Revistar mix or something like that, or Ascra or something like that. So that's kind of where winter wheat is at the moment. So that Leaf 3 application is imminent on practically all crops, if not done already. In terms of winter oats, growth stage 32, a lot of crops are gone through that now at the stage, but people probably didn't get out their second growth regulator on some of those oat crops last week because the weather wasn't great. So I would say in those cases, oats are probably getting the second growth regulator and a fungicide at the moment, albeit with the exception of Isabel, most crops are actually quite clean from mildew and crown rust, so they're actually quite clean. And I suppose the surprise one really is winter barley. Joyu now is on peeping or well out at this stage. So most people have put on their final fungicide on the likes of Joyu, and a little bit of Integral is something like that as well. But I see other crops here as well. I see Cassia now today, and we can see the start of awns peeping on Cassia. So within the next 3, 4, 5 days, Cassia will want its final fungicide as well. So the key one, or the one where people are getting caught a little bit, I suppose, is where they missed the growth regulator maybe in the last 2 weeks, and they were hoping to get in a growth regulator now. So some of those crops now are getting very late for a growth regulator. So your only choices are now something like Ciaran or some of those type products, those Etifon products. So that's where crops are at the moment.
And tell me, Shay, in terms of the final timing of to be safe to put on those PGRs onto winter barley, where is that? Is it too late for Turple if the awns are already peeping out?
Yeah, so like the likes of Turple, you're kind of once the awns start to appear, Michael, you're too late. You really are confined to the likes of the Ciaran, the Etifon products. So you have Ciaran, Padawan, those type of products. That's really all you have left now at this stage.
And if you do, I don't know, if somebody not every field is completely even all the way across. If there's some parts of it with the awns out, is there a potential of damage if somebody happened to have Turple in stock?
You'll probably get away with it. It's again, the label states, I think it's 13.9 on the label as far as I can remember. So you risk kind of maybe not having a full shortening effect of it because the crop has gone through the elongation from between the nodes. So Turple shortens those internode lengths. So the problem is with Turple at this stage, you're probably not going to get the full effect from the Turple even if you do apply it.
And you mentioned the final fungicide time in the winter barley. Why is it so critical that we get it on at this stage?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I suppose this has come up a lot in the last couple of weeks on our farm walks, and people are kind of asking us about this. And I suppose people have to remember that it's not Rincosporium or net blotch that we're trying to control at this stage. It's Ramillaria. So Ramillaria spreads upwards through the crop from the lower leaves all the way up through the crop. So the longer we leave off a fungicide now at this stage, the more we're allowing Ramillaria spread up through the crop and take out leaves as it's coming up through the crop. So people are kind of always of the opinion that we should apply the fungicides later to give us longevity of the fungicides into the season. But in this case, you have to stop the Ramillaria from moving up through the crop, because that will make the crop senesce even quicker. So that's why we put on the fungicide at that aunce peeping stage. That seems to be the kind of ideal stage to stop that Ramillaria spreading, because we have to remember we can only protect against Ramillaria. We can't prevent it once it gets in.
A prevention rather than cure. Just to finish up, Shay, just on the winter crops, there's a good bit of talk, certainly towards the northeast and maybe even further across the country, about yellow rust in wheat. Is that a bigger problem this year? And the main fungicide you talked about a second ago, will that be enough to control yellow rust?
I think there's two types of crops out there at the moment. There's crops that are relatively clean, they have a bit of septoria in it, but certainly in certain areas, it's not every field and it's not every variety. We are seeing yellow rust. Last week I was in North Dublin, and we could see Champion up there with a lot of yellow rust on it, whereas Graham, which we know does get yellow rust, the juvenile yellow rust, was quite clean. So again, it's not every variety. We'd see it in like JB Diego. We're hearing it in Fitzroy, Spearhead, Thorpe, those sort of varieties. But on my travels around the country, it's not every field that has it. So from that point of view, really what people should be doing is looking at what's in the field. If you do see yellow rust, then you're probably looking at changing your choice of fungicides to control that. So you're looking at products like tebuconazole, like the likes of Elatis Era, which will give you better control. But you're also having to look at the crop more often, because yellow rust will cycle every 10 to 12 days. So unlike septoria, which takes about 3 weeks or a little bit more than 3 weeks to cycle, yellow rust will cycle a lot quicker. So you need to be back in those fields again in 10 days to see if the yellow rust has been controlled. And if it hasn't, you're probably back in again with another yellow rust, a product that's good on yellow rust, the likes of Comet, the likes of tebuconazole, as I said before, or Elatis Era if you haven't used it in the first application. So where you have yellow rust, you are looking at changing fundamentally your T3 or leaf 3 application.
So it is a matter pretty much, if you have it on, it's just keep looking at it. It's not it's not a scenario whereby you're going to have to go with more fungicides. It's more a case of keep an eye on it and treat it as you go.
And like I say, Michael, some of the susceptible varieties, they're not getting it in every field. So I have seen Champion that's perfectly clean, then I've seen Champion that's absolutely rotten with yellow rust, and not a million miles away from one another either. So you have to look at it on a field by field basis.
Great stuff. Ciaran, can I bring you in? How are crops looking down in your part of the world down south?
Very good. I have to say very good. I suppose we've a lot of, in the south in particular, a lot of spring barley. Sown in great conditions. It got, fertilizer, then it got the rain, and we're seeing rapid growth at the moment, So it's like some of the earlier sown spring barleys are well into tillering at this stage. So great progress. It's even in the winter crops,
Okay.
Certainly moving very, very well.
So for those spring crops, what are the actions that farmers need to prioritize over the next sort of 7 to 10 days?
I think really, I suppose spring barley obviously being the main crop, it's weed control. Get weeds out of the way. We are seeing it's I suppose just the rapid growth we're just having at the moment, but weed size is quite large in some fields already. So I suppose there's two issues there. One is your canopy is also quite large, so it can be harder to control those weeds. So getting out, that would be the priority for me. And I suppose the second point on weed control then, well, two other points. One is make sure that the herbicide rate matches the weed size. So, you might have planned maybe a 3/4 rate of a sulfonylurea with something, but just to be careful if the weeds could be a little bit bigger than you anticipated or when you were planning. And the final one then on weed control is just watch out for resistant weeds. Walk the field before you put out your herbicide. The one I'm seeing, obviously, we're all very well aware of chickweed, But what I'm seeing an awful lot more chickweed this year, whether it's the weather pattern, even in grassland, and it's growing very, very quickly. So again, just to make sure that, say, the likes of Fluoxypyr, or you might get that in a hurler, or if you're using Galaxy, make sure the rate is high there to our Pixaro to catch that big chickweed if it's there.
So the key thing would it be clear, right in saying is that the chickweed and some other weeds are resistant to the sulfonylureas, as in the Cameo Maxes and the Ali Maxes and the Biplays and that kind of thing, whereas they're not resistant to the likes of Phylloxera and Pixaro and those kind of things. So it's the rate of the mixer partner with the SU is a really important bit there.
Is really key. And it's not to say that, just chickweed. I'm just because that's probably the most common one. People will call marigold or poppy will probably know all about it. The likes of speedwell. Now we picked up resistant speedwell in Cork there last year. So again, if you're having trouble controlling it, you won't have to switch your partner there to actually the hormones actually do, like the High Lord Merkham do a really good job on that. But again, the key to it, like always, is getting into the field, see what you have, and then make sure the herbicide is matching then both the weed and the weed size.
Do you have a preference, or is there a timing issues there around controlling wild oats in those crops?
Again, I suppose there's that conundrum always, and I suppose sometimes we would like to do the wild oats first, and then follow up with the herbicide. I think just the way the weather pattern is this year and the growth in crops, I think for the majority of people that wild oat herbicide is going to fall in with the weed control, both from a convenience and I think just from that canopy development perspective. So, just a reminder, if you're using the likes of Axial, that you need that higher rate of 0.6. And then obviously you can't mix that with hormone herbicides, like I mentioned, High Lord Merkham there a while ago.
And just a final one then, Ciaran, around nitrogen or maybe P's and K's and maybe concentrate on nitrogen, should all of this nitrogen be applied to spring barley and oats or maybe even wheat at the moment?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so, really. Or so, like we are getting into the stage, I mentioned that early sown barley, you'll be quite shortly getting into stem extension. And, that's when the big demand comes on the crop. There's still a nice little bit of moisture in the soil there, so get that final bit of nitrogen out, especially on spring barley now. And, that when the big demand comes on it as the crop goes from vegetative to the reproductive into stem extension, it'll be there, and that's where that's where you're going to get best value for your applied nitrogen.
As you mentioned, and the final question to you, Ciaran, as you mentioned, farmers should just get out and walk their fields to see what's out there. Is there anything else that farmers should be looking at as they're out walking out and about in their fields?
I mean, you couldn't walk your fields often enough, but like it was interesting to hear Shay talking about yellow rust, and I suppose sometimes in the south, it hasn't been a great challenge, to be honest, in recent years. But in the last 2 days, I've come across a good few cases of yellow rust in winter wheat. So again, that's something a grower maybe in Cork mightn't be expecting. You'd be kind of targeting and watching Septoria, obviously, as being the main challenge. But yeah, certainly in Champion, we've had a few cases locally here of yellow rust in recent days, and as Shay said, yellow rust can get away on you very, very quickly. So if you have yellow rust, there's no hanging about. You just have to get in and deal with it straight away.
That's brilliant, Ciaran. Thanks very much to Ciaran and to Shay. It was a quick update on the critical actions over the next 7 to 10 days. And look, guys, we'll have you back in another week or two just to give an update on where the crops are there. Thanks very much, Shay and Ciaran.
Thanks,
no problem, Michael.
And now let's hear from Andy Mahon, a farm manager in the UK, to chat through his farming year so far.
We didn't get any winter wheat planted until middle of November, and we had a real good spell of weather for probably 2 weeks in the middle of November there. So we went hard at it then. It was hard going, and it wasn't great conditions, but we got it in, and it's okay. It's not brilliant. There's a few iffy headlands here and there, but the rest of it's not too bad. But it was very localized. Guys further north of Yorkshire, north of England and Scotland had absolutely brilliant conditions for drilling. Got on real well, and even further on the south coast, but there was a band up the middle of the UK that copped it from sort of Liverpool down to us, just sort of north of London, and yeah, it was pretty bad.
So given that you're in kind of a more no-till type of system, that kind of autumn probably didn't suit you terribly well, did it?
Yes and no. We got on okay actually.
Okay.
Where we drilled really comfortably was into cover crops, where we had got good cover crops established last spring. and over through the summer we drilled into those. They were easy going, actually. They were quite good. Where we were struggling was after spring oats, I suppose, was the stickiest bit. So where you got more soil exposed, it tends to stick to the drill, and it was bunging up a bit. But yeah, we got there in the end.
Okay, but I suppose maybe on the other positive side of things, you're a good bit later. So does that mean your blackgrass challenge was a bit less?
Yeah, massively so. Yeah, I'll never drill unless I'm sure I can get preems on as well. And yeah, our crops are clean as a whistle. Actually, this year we've got very little blackgrass in the winter wheat. It's really good. Yeah, really pleased with that.
Because you had difficulties last season, I remember.
Yeah.
With the previous wet year, you were kind of saying wasn't good at all.
Yeah, it wasn't great. Last year was particularly bad for blackgrass than the previous year, and so we've got a fair bit in the seed bank. But this autumn we've had a good go at it, and changing the cropping round, I think as well. We've had a good burn off, and we've got fair bit of spring wheat in this spring, and burnt off prior to that. And because it's been dry, really, this spring's been so dry, really. We haven't had the spring flush of blackgrass really either. So yeah, it's been helpful in terms of clearing the farm up. And the other bonus this spring being so dry, we've been mold draining quite a bit, and trying to sort out a bit of drainage, and we've worked hard on that over winter as well. So that'll all help.
Okay, so for the spring wheat, Andy, that you have in, are they milling wheats that you're mostly putting in?
Yeah, milling wheats. Yeah. We've got a couple of different varieties, and then I've got a blend. So I've just started growing for a company called Wild Farms this year. They've probably got about 110, 120 growers in the UK now. They pay, like, they set their stall out quite early doors and say what they'll pay you straight off the bat. The big thing with Wild Farm, they want a blend. They want a flower strip or a bicrop round the outside of the field, and they no pesticides. So you're allowed to use a pre-drilling Roundup, and that's your lot. Then you're allowed nutrition, but not any pesticides.
Oh, geez, that's pretty tricky. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got 5 fields of that now, 6 fields of that in this year, and probably thistles are a big issue in one field. We've got patches of thistles. I don't know quite. I'm going to see if I can get a hoe or something in to have a go at those. But actually, the rest of it's not terrible. I think because it's been dry, we haven't had that flush of spring sort of polygonums and stuff. So we'll see how that goes. That'll be interesting.
And what sort of quality specs are they expecting from that?
It's the usual milling specs. I can't remember what the protein level is. I think they take it down to 12.5% protein. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but it's the usual 72 and 250 Hagberg. So you're allowed to use, I think it's 80 kilos of bagged N, and then you're allowed to use up to 40 kilos of foliar N as well. But they pay for sap testing, and they've been really good. They've got an in-house agronomist, and he's constantly sort of updating everybody and sort of giving you guidelines. You can ring them up anytime, and they're real forward thinking. They want to sort of cut the supermarkets out of the supply chain a little bit. So they're contracting growers direct, they're milling it themselves, and then they're putting it into the supermarket shelves and bakers and independent bakers and restaurants and stuff. So yeah, it's good.
What brand in terms of is it pesticide free, or how are they differentiating that brand, if you like, on the supermarket shelf?
So their branding is absolutely top notch. They're based in London, and they've really done a good job on their branding. It's Wild Farm. They just grow. They class it as pesticide free wheat. So and they've got like loads of bugs and stuff. Their labeling's very clear and very good. They're in Tesco. They just launched in Tesco last week or the week before, I think. But they're in Waitrose and M&S over here. And they're very good on the branding. They've got all sort of on shelf branding with trying to show that there's biodiversity in the fields where the Wild Farm wheat's grown, and that's their sort of main message, if you like.
Okay, very good. And for the rest of your crops that you have, Andy, how are they looking? Did the ones that you planted in November, did they come through the winter okay for you?
Yeah, on the whole, mostly, yeah. Where we had a bit of waterlogging or sort of they sat with wet feet, there's some patches, it's a bit thin, but on the whole, not too bad. They're well behind. Like normally this time of year, I'd expect to be hitting sort of growth stage 32. We're only at sort of probably 31, just about hitting 32. We'll put our sort of T1 sprays on next week probably, but Yeah, they're a bit further behind. We're probably 2 weeks behind. It'll be interesting to see. They're very short as well. So whether
Okay.
the flag leaf for us would normally come out sort of about the 19th of May. So it'll be interesting to see if it hits the 19th of May this year, or if it's later. I can't remember a season where it's been later than that usually. So it's got a lot of
Okay.
growing to do in the next sort of 2, 3 weeks.
Have you any disease issues so far, or is it pretty okay? We're hearing a lot about, and we have a lot here anyway, in terms of yellow rust seems to be really taken off altogether.
Yeah, yellow rust, a hot topic over here as well. Most of my wheat's Crusoe, and I've got some SY cheer as well. But so Crusoe brown rust is the big issue there. I haven't really seen it as a problem as so far. So we've been using. We did a sort of a growth stage 30 fungicide spray with tebuconazole and azoxystrobin, and that just more of insurance like that sort of
Okay.
only cost me about £8 a hectare, so it's worth it for the insurance, I think, on that. We got brown rust was rife here last year, really bit me badly, so I'm very cautious this year with it.
Yeah, the last time we were talking, Andy, we were talking about or you were chatting about how you were going to embrace some of the new governmental environmental schemes, and you were probably going to be paring back some of your production and putting some of that into some of those schemes. How did that work out for you? Have you gone down that road, or what way are you?
Oh, that's a hot topic over here, Michael. We've sort of planned to put 2/3 of our acreage into the environmental schemes, and then crop a third. The schemes are 3 years, so you've probably heard that they've pulled the schemes now. So we've got 2 years to go on one scheme. Luckily enough, I'd had another scheme application in the system, and they're telling us that if your scheme's in the pipeline, I haven't been offered an agreement yet, but if you've got your application in, you will get offered an agreement. So I'm waiting on that at the moment, but so hopefully we'll get that. But anybody who didn't get an application in, they're out in the cold, and it's going to be tough. We haven't got any subsidies now, really. No sort of direct farm payments as such. So unless you're getting that environmental money, your farm's got to be making a profit from growing crops. So yeah, it's tough times ahead, I think.
And you said you have some in already, and you have more in the pipeline. Would that have brought you up to that 2/3 that you were planning for?
Yeah, it should do.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Wow. Geez.
if we don't get that sort of second scheme, we'll have to have a rethink. But again, this is the annoying thing. Nobody really knows what's happening. The scheme, the government are saying there's going to be another scheme, but they won't launch it till next year. So there's a fair old gap there. I probably don't need to tell you guys that if you've been keeping an eye on it over here, the government are really putting the boot in on farming over here, and
Yeah.
they're really not very helpful or supportive in any way. And I think I've never known it so sort of depressed or uncertain, and everybody's pretty down on it at the moment. And this weather now, we were all grateful for a very dry start to spring, and suddenly everyone got busy and they're enjoying the weather, and now everyone's praying for rain. So it's
Yeah.
if we have another bad harvest, it could really hit a few guys badly. So
Yeah, I was also reading about, I suppose, some of the ancillary things around that uncertainty around machinery dealers closing and very little machines being bought, and it's has broader effects than just maybe even the farmer.
absolutely. There's so our local New Holland dealers pulled out. There was a sort of a case dealer moved to Deutz. They've just shut as well, and they've been around for donkey's years. There's been a real sort of rejig of dealers in the area. It's the ancillary industries. I was talking to a guy. His sort of main aim or main job was applying for these grant schemes. His job's basically gone to a halt overnight.
Yeah.
He's out of business. He'll still have some work with ongoing schemes, and if there's new schemes come on board. But yeah, there's a lot of. I don't think the government realised that actually, and even looking around here, there's a big farm down the road, 4,500 acres. They've sold all their kit, and the farm's gone out to a contract.
Wow.
That's a sign of the times. There's 3 local farms now, including that one, that have in the last sort of 10 years, if you like, that have sold up, and they've gone out to other farmers to farm it, to contract farm it. So yeah, it's a sign of the times over here. There's a lot less kit in the area and a lot less for dealers and stuff to go around, and it's that network of farmers as well that's getting smaller and smaller, I think, as well, which is it's not good.
And from that longer term perspective, I don't know whether you can even go long term, even medium term kind of perspective. And I know on your farm, you were saying you have a bit of a solar part to your farm as well. As that, are there other places that, you know, the farm that you're on will have to look towards rather than that production based model?
Yeah. You know, my focus now is is to look at off-farm income, really. And it's, you know, I've sat down with the owners and we met last week. We worked, the three of us, the owners are brilliant, I have to say here. They pretty much leave me to it. But we sort of sit down and talk strategically about what we're going to do and which direction to head in. And you know, my sort of recommendation, and they've sort of gone along with it, is that we concentrate on sort of off-farm income. So we're looking at developing there's dog walking paddocks, believe it or not, quite a thing around here.
Okay.
So we're looking at putting one of those in. Basically a nice secure fenced off paddock where you can walk your naughty dog and not worry about him running off. So we're looking at more industrial units as well. We've got planning permission on some. We're just trying to finish off there's a few planning conditions, get them signed off, and then we can start on that. So yeah, we're just looking at other, you know, there is opportunity. There's land for sale next door, but I just don't feel buying land is the right thing at the moment. You know, it's I think for us, if we're going to invest money, it's putting up sheds and buildings that we can look to do other things with other than farming. So you know, sort of multi-purpose, very general sheds, but there's a real good market for renting out units and stuff around where we are. So that's more what our focus is going to be going forward, I think.
Yeah, I got to say it's a very, you know, it's a quickly changing world in the UK over the last 5 or 6 years. Do you see maybe going back and maybe trying to finish on a bit of a positive note in terms of the farming bit that you're in, and you're very much down, you know, down a road fairly well in terms of changing your farm into that kind of no-till scenario? Are you happy that maybe you're very happy that you've brought the cost structure on your farm down to maybe its very lowest level?
Yeah, I think that is the thing, actually, Michael. You've hit the nail on the head. Our cost structure is very low. We haven't got a lot of big kit. We haven't got a yard full of tractors, and I haven't got yards full of men sort of trying to find them work. You know, it's just I'm the only full timer, and then I've got a guy who helps me sort of 8 months of the year when we're busy. It works really well for both of us. Yeah, there's guys, you know, I see guys with lots of tractors, lots of yards full of kit, and lots of blokes to keep employed, and they're on that treadmill, and they've got to keep going. You know, it's a worry. There's so much uncertainty. You know, I don't think anybody realised when we had BPS and those sort of schemes. You know, if you had a bad year, you always had some income, but when you've got no income at all, you know, other than what you're making from farming or these environmental schemes, you know, you've got to be on the ball. You've got to know your costs, and you've got to be thinking like a little bit differently and a bit more outside the box. And I think what we're doing is good. We're looking at carbon sales as well. I think that could be a good source of income for us. And you know, like I say, having a low cost structure, the type of farming we're doing is appealing and is more backed by, you know, customers now as well, like Wild Farms. They want to see our sort of style of farming. So I think, you know, farming, I think we're in as good a position as we could be in at the moment, put it that way.
Andy, listen, thanks very much for chatting to me again. We might catch up to you somewhere around harvest time and see how whatever you have in, how that's harvesting at least anyways, and see how you're getting on there.
Good to chat, Michael.
So that's it for this episode, and my thanks to Andy, Shay and Ciaran for joining me on the podcast. So as usual, if you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.